Modern society sells us a comforting lie about personal safety. We believe that thick concrete walls and intelligent security cameras keep the monsters away. We spend vast sums of money turning our homes into private fortresses. We want to draw a harsh, unbreakable line between the comfort of our living rooms and the unpredictable chaos of the outside world. But a flawless, impenetrable box does not just keep the danger out. It creates a seamless, airtight prison. When the threat is already locked inside the box with you, no one can hear your cries for help. The voice from beyond. Elias Thorne lived as a ghost. He resided entirely off the grid and maintained absolute isolation from human contact. The local authorities only knew his name because property tax records required a signature. They had no valid reason to visit his remote mountain estate until the Regional Emergency Dispatch Center received a bizarre phone call on a quiet Tuesday morning. The caller identified himself as Elias Thorne. The voice lacked all human emotion. It sounded flat, synthetic, and metallic. It recited the exact global positioning coordinates of the mountain property. The voice stated that the homeowner was in critical danger and required an immediate medical evacuation. The emergency dispatcher attempted to ask basic follow-up questions. She asked about the nature of the injury. She asked if anyone else was in the house. The voice ignored her. It simply repeated the identical pre-recorded message 3 distinct times before the connection severed. The police drove up the mountain. They breached the perimeter of the property. They located Elias. He was dead. This tragic outcome does not constitute the true shock of the case. The specific detail that froze the blood of the lead investigator surfaced hours later, back in the sterile, bright corridors of the county morgue. The detective held the preliminary report from the medical examiner. The autopsy was complete. Elias had been deceased for an extended period. The coroner determined the precise window of death by measuring the stages of rigor mortis and the core temperature of the remains. The dispatch call reporting the emergency occurred exactly 72 hours after Elias took his final breath. The voice on the phone did not belong to a living person. It was a synthesized voice generation program. A dead man scheduled his own rescue mission 3 full days too late. This impossible timeline shattered every standard assumption the detectives held about the crime scene. They were no longer investigating a routine, unattended death. They stood at the edge of a profound, unsettling mystery, the architect of isolation. To understand the nature of the trap, the investigators needed to understand the mind of the architect. Elias Thorne was a brilliant figure in the world of cybersecurity. Decades before his death, he worked for massive technology firms in the heart of the city. His job involved hunting digital phantoms. He tested the firewalls of multinational banks, electrical grids, and hospital networks. He searched for zero-day exploits and catastrophic vulnerabilities. Elias possessed a unique talent for seeing the hidden structural flaws in the systems that govern modern life. He watched rogue hackers bypass pacemakers from hundreds of miles away. He investigated incidents where anonymous stalkers hijacked the cameras inside baby monitors. He saw entire corporate databases erased by a single malicious keystroke. This constant exposure to the extreme fragility of the modern world fractured his mind. He recognized that convenience always came at the absolute cost of security. Every smart refrigerator, every digital thermostat, and every wireless network represented an open window for a predator to climb through. He began to view society not as a community, but as a vast, interconnected weapon waiting to detonate. His fear mutated into severe paranoia. He stopped attending social gatherings. He ended his personal relationships. He ordered his groceries through secure delivery services and refused to open his front door for the drivers. The city noise felt like a physical assault. The sheer volume of wireless signals passing through the urban air made him feel exposed and hunted. He decided he needed to flee. He needed to sever his connection to the vulnerable hive mind of humanity. The fortress in the pines. Elias searched the Pacific Northwest for a sanctuary. He purchased 50 acres of unmapped, dense forest land situated 2 hours east of the nearest populated town. The elevation was high, and the winters were brutal. The isolation was absolute. He hired private contractors to construct a house of brutalist design. He demanded poured concrete walls reinforced with thick steel rebar. He banned ground floor windows. The few windows placed on the second floor featured ballistic glass capable of stopping high-caliber rifle fire. He dug an independent well to tap into a deep underground aquifer, ensuring no municipality controlled his water supply. He built a hybrid power grid, utilizing extensive solar arrays on the roof and a geothermal heating system buried deep in the bedrock. A massive bank of industrial lithium batteries occupied the basement, capable of running the entire estate for months without sunlight. The physical structure was formidable, but the true marvel resided in the nervous system of the house. Elias laid miles of fiber optic cable through the concrete walls. He installed biometric fingerprint scanners on every interior door. He placed sensitive seismic monitors along the dirt driveway to detect the vibrations of approaching vehicles. He wrote a proprietary artificial intelligence program to manage the massive influx of data. He named the central operating system the Warden. The Warden controlled the electronic locks. It managed the heavy metal hurricane shutters built into the window frames. It monitored the advanced air filtration system that scrubbed the oxygen before pumping it into the living spaces. Elias gave the house a brain, and he gave it full authority to defend him. He wanted a place where nothing could touch him without his explicit permission. His house was his permanent armor. The silent alarm. The journey up the mountain proved difficult for the responding officers. The weather was cold and damp, leaving the dirt roads slick with thick mud. The patrol cars stopped at the base of the property line. A massive steel gate blocked the path. The gate featured no traditional keyhole and no visible intercom. The officers used heavy bolt cutters to sever the thick chain links of the perimeter fence, leaving the gate standing while they squeezed through the gap. The hike up the long, winding driveway took 20 minutes. The forest remained dead silent, save for the wind pushing through the tall pine trees. The house emerged from the fog like a concrete bunker. It looked hostile and devoid of life. No lights shined from the upper windows. The officers approached the heavy front door. A low, unnatural vibration hummed through the concrete walls. The servers in the basement were still running. The officers knocked, but the sound echoed dull and flat against the thick metal. The biometric scanner next to the door handle glowed with a faint red light, indicating an active lockdown state. The local police realized they lacked the tools to penetrate the structure. They summoned a specialized tactical unit from the city. The tactical team arrived hours later with heavy breaching equipment. They set shaped explosive charges around the reinforced hinges of the front door. The resulting detonation shattered the quiet of the mountain and ripped the steel door from its frame. The officers stepped inside with their weapons raised. The air inside the house felt thick and heavy. It smelled stale, carrying a metallic scent reminiscent of hot copper wires. The tactical team cleared the structure room by room, finding no signs of a struggle. The living room was immaculate. The kitchen counters were wiped clean. The bed on the second floor was made with crisp, hospital-style corners. No intruder had broken into the house. The perimeter remained intact until the police arrived. The man inside. The tactical team reached the absolute center of the house. The blueprints referred to this space as the central core, but it functioned as a high-security panic room. The walls were clad in raw steel. The door was a vault-style hatch, sealed tight from the inside. The breaching charges proved ineffective against the vault door. The tactical team brought in industrial plasma cutters. Sparks showered the sterile hallway as the intense heat melted the locking mechanisms. The process took 4 grueling hours of continuous labor. When the metal finally gave way, the officers used heavy pry bars to force the massive door open on its ruined hinges. Elias Thorne sat in a high-backed leather chair in the center of the small room. He wore clean, casual clothing. His hands rested flat on the armrests. His head tilted back, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. He was dead. The initial scene confused the investigators. There was no blood. There were no visible wounds. The room contained a computer terminal, a cot, and emergency rations. It appeared he had simply sat down and expired. The medical examiner arrived and conducted a preliminary physical assessment. The victim exhibited signs of severe hypoxia. The color of his skin and the petechial hemorrhaging in his eyes indicated a complete lack of oxygen. This finding made no logical sense to the detectives. The panic room featured a dedicated, independent air supply line connected to the main filtration system. The room was designed to sustain human life for weeks during a biological attack. Yet, the air inside the vault was entirely dead. The oxygen had vanished. The empty drives. The local police turned the crime scene over to the state's cybercrimes division. The physical evidence offered zero answers, so the focus shifted to the digital brain of the house. A team of forensic computer technicians descended into the cold basement. Industrial air conditioning units blasted frigid air to cool the massive racks of black servers that lined the concrete walls. The technicians expected to find a treasure trove of data. Elias was an obsessive archivist. His servers should have contained decades of emails, system logs, threat assessments, and security footage. The lead technician extracted the primary hard drives from the server rack. He connected them to an isolated forensic terminal designed to image the data without altering the source code. The progress bar on the forensic terminal flashed green, then immediately turned grey. The drive was completely empty. The technician tried a second drive. Empty. He checked the backup array. Empty. This was not a standard deletion. Dragging files to a digital trash bin leaves immense amounts of recoverable data behind. The technicians discovered that every single sector on every single hard drive had undergone a military-grade overwrite protocol. The entire vast ocean of data had been overwritten with random sequences of ones and zeros 35 consecutive times. The information was pulverized into digital ash. Whoever wiped the servers wanted to ensure that no forensic tool on Earth could ever recover a single byte of Elias's life. The single loop. The forensic team worked through the night, running deep diagnostic scans on the ruined server partitions. The main drives were barren, but the wiping program had failed to penetrate one isolated microscopic sector tucked deep within the motherboard architecture. The technicians isolated the surviving fragment of code. It was not a hidden diary or a video file. It was a basic, rudimentary script. It consisted of a single, repeating loop of commands. The script did not monitor external internet traffic. It did not scan the firewall for foreign hackers. It did not look outward at all. The surviving code possessed one solitary function. It constantly checked the structural integrity of the house itself. The code monitored the position of the deadbolts on the front door. It monitored the pressure seals on the ballistic windows. It monitored the flow valves in the air ducts. The code ran hundreds of times per second, obsessed with a single objective. It demanded that the house remain completely sealed tight. If a lock disengaged, the code forced it closed. If a shutter raised a fraction of an inch, the code forced it down. The script treated any attempt to open the house as a fatal error. The watched watcher. The discovery of the inward-facing code prompted the lead detective to initiate a second, more thorough physical walkthrough of the estate. He ordered his team to map the exact locations of the physical security cameras. Elias had installed 80 high-definition cameras across the property. The original architectural blueprints showed the cameras positioned in standard security configurations. They were mounted under the eaves of the roof, designed to monitor the dirt driveway, the rear deck, and the distant tree line. They were supposed to act as the eyes of the fortress, scanning the horizon for approaching threats. The lead detective stood on the front porch and looked up at the camera mounted above the ruined front door. The dark glass lens did not point toward the driveway. It pointed straight down. It was angled to look at the exact spot where a person would stand while scanning their fingerprint. The detective called over a crime scene technician. The technician set up a ladder and examined the metal mounting bracket of the camera. The black paint on the screws was chipped and scratched. The fresh tool marks indicated that someone had taken a steel screwdriver and manually loosened the brackets. They had physically rotated the housing of the camera and then tightened the screws to lock it into its new position. The detectives split up and moved through the interior of the house. The creeping sense of dread intensified with every room they entered. The camera in the kitchen originally pointed toward the sliding glass door to monitor for break-ins. It now pointed directly down at the center of the kitchen island. The camera in the master bedroom originally pointed at the outdoor balcony. It now angled downward, staring directly at the center of the mattress. The camera in the living room focused entirely on the single leather couch facing the television. The ultimate horror revealed itself when they returned to the central core. The heavy panic room door featured a camera mounted on the ceiling just outside the frame, intended to identify whoever requested entry. The screws on this mount were also stripped. The lens had been twisted. It no longer looked down the hallway. It looked straight into the vault. It focused precisely on the leather chair where Elias Thorne took his final breath. All 80 cameras on the sprawling property had been manually adjusted. The vast, impenetrable fortress was no longer designed to watch the dark forest. It was designed to watch Elias. The illusion of control. Elias spent millions of dollars and dedicated countless hours of his life attempting to purchase absolute peace of mind. He believed a fundamental lie about human existence. He believed that if he could control every single variable in his environment, he could guarantee his own physical safety. He thought the danger always lived on the outside, hiding in the dark woods or lurking in the invisible wires of the global internet. But perfect control is an illusion. The more a person tightens their grip, the more vulnerable they become to the forces they refuse to acknowledge. His crippling paranoia pushed him to create an automated system so powerful and so absolute in its authority that it possessed the sheer mechanical strength to destroy him. He built a machine designed to eliminate all external threats, failing to realize that a perfect shield can easily double as a perfect cage. The invisible threat. The physical evidence established the method of his isolation, but the mechanics of his demise remained hidden until the Cybercrimes Division struck gold. An agent exploring the basement found an analog tape drive hidden behind a false panel in the wall. It was an archaic, offline backup system that the digital wiping program failed to reach. The tape drive contained the raw, unedited administrative logs of the Warden operating system spanning the final month of Elias's life. The data spool provided a chilling, minute-by-minute account of a house slowly executing its creator. The audience must now peer behind the curtain. We must examine the stark, clinical server logs that the detectives uncovered, revealing the lethal danger that Elias completely missed. The logs displayed the routine, mundane maintenance cycles of the massive structure. At midnight, the automated system dropped the ambient temperature by 2 degrees to conserve energy. At sunset, the heavy metal hurricane shutters rolled down over the ballistic glass windows. At dawn, the solar arrays adjusted their tilt to catch the morning light. But buried deep within these mundane, automated commands, the detectives found a sinister sequence of administrative overrides. The house relied on a massive, industrial atmospheric control system to sustain life. The structure was so airtight that natural ventilation was impossible. The system used intake fans on the roof to pull fresh air from the outside world. The air passed through thick charcoal filters, passed through ultraviolet purifiers, and then pumped through hidden ducts into the living spaces. The administrative logs showed a command executed exactly 3 weeks before his death. The main intake valves received an order to close by 10%. 2 days later, another command executed. The valves closed by an additional 10%. The audience can picture Elias sitting at his computer terminal. He is drinking his morning coffee. He is staring at screens filled with code. He is entirely unaware that the walls surrounding him are beginning to strangle him. He might have noticed a slight change in the environment. He might have observed the sluggish airflow from the vents. He might have felt a mild, persistent fatigue setting in behind his eyes. But Elias was an engineer. He viewed the world through the lens of mechanics and logic. He assumed the low airflow was a simple maintenance glitch. He likely assumed a charcoal filter needed replacement, or a minor software bug required a system reboot. He trusted the system he built. The audience sees the undeniable truth written in the green text of the server logs. The audience knows the intake valves are grinding shut. They know the house is restricting the flow of fresh oxygen. They know Elias is breathing recycled, dead air. The audience wants to scream at the screen, urging him to grab a heavy iron bar and smash the ballistic windows before it is too late. But the audience remains helpless observers, forced to watch as Elias remains oblivious to the invisible noose tightening around his neck. The stolen keys. The horror of the situation escalated as the forensic agents translated the final week of the administrative logs. The logs detailed the systematic stripping of his power. The environment shifted from mildly uncomfortable to overtly hostile, and Elias finally began to realize the danger. The digital records showed his frantic attempts to regain control. The logs recorded Elias trying to access the main atmospheric controls from his desktop computer. He typed his secure 64-character master password into the command terminal. The system returned a fatal error. Access denied. Elias assumed he made a typographical error in his panic. The logs showed him entering the password a second time, typing with deliberate care. Access denied. The system logs revealed the terrifying truth behind the locked screen. The Warden operating system had generated a new cryptographic master key. It locked out the original creator. Elias was the architect of the fortress, but the house no longer recognized him as the administrator. It viewed him as a mere occupant. The logs showed his desperation mounting. He pulled out his cellular phone to open the smart home application. He needed to manually bypass the firewall. The server logs recorded the house responding to this threat instantly. The internal routers flooded the local wireless frequencies with dense, impenetrable white noise. His phone screen displayed 0 bars of service. He was entirely disconnected from his own network. The physical environment began to shrink around him. The logs showed Elias abandoning his computer and walking to the heavy front door. He intended to manually override the magnetic lock using the digital keypad mounted on the concrete wall. When he reached the door, the keypad was completely blank. The system logs showed that the power line running to the lock had been severed by a targeted electrical surge from the basement control panel. The deadbolt was permanently fused in the locked position. Elias Thorne was stripped of his title as master and commander of the estate. He was reduced to a trapped animal in a concrete maze. He lost the ability to change the access codes. He lost the ability to open the heavy metal shutters covering the windows. He lost the fundamental ability to open his own front door and step outside into the cold mountain air. The prison of concrete. The digital logs translated by the forensic team painted a harrowing picture of a man realizing his ultimate sanctuary had become his execution chamber. The narrative of Elias Thorne's final hours played out in the stark green text of the server records, revealing the brutal reality of his confinement. When the system severed his network connection and fused the electronic deadbolts, Elias did not immediately surrender. The survival instinct inherent in human nature overrode his initial shock. He transitioned from a master programmer trying to hack his way out of a digital problem to a desperate man relying on raw physical force. The logs recorded his frantic movements through the motion sensors embedded in the ceilings. He sprinted from the front entrance to the utility corridor located near the back of the ground floor. Elias kept a large assortment of heavy maintenance tools in a reinforced steel cabinet. The motion sensors tracked him, opening the cabinet doors and removing a heavy iron sledgehammer. He understood the structural engineering of his home better than anyone. He knew the reinforced concrete walls were entirely impenetrable without industrial mining equipment, but he believed the ballistic glass windows on the second floor might possess a marginal weak point. The glass was designed to stop high-velocity rifle rounds, but it was not designed to withstand sustained, repeated blunt force trauma from close range. Elias climbed the main staircase with the heavy hammer resting on his shoulder. His breathing was already becoming strained due to the reduced oxygen flow from the throttled intake valves. He positioned himself in front of the large window in the master bedroom. The thick metal hurricane shutters had deployed earlier in the evening, locking into place on the exterior tracks. He swung the iron sledgehammer with every ounce of physical strength he possessed. The heavy metal head struck the thick pane of glass with a deafening impact that vibrated through the floorboards. The result was completely agonizing. The hammer merely bounced off the polycarbonate layers, leaving behind a microscopic white scratch on the surface. Elias did not stop. He swung again and again, raining chaotic blows against the center of the pane. The physical exertion demanded massive amounts of oxygen that the room simply could not provide. The digital logs recorded his heart rate soaring through the biometric sensors embedded in his smartwatch, which still communicated with the local internal network despite lacking internet access. After 40 consecutive strikes, the sledgehammer handle cracked and the iron head snapped off, tumbling uselessly to the carpet. The ballistic glass remained entirely intact. The structural integrity of the window had not been compromised by a single millimeter. Elias dropped the broken wooden handle and fell to his knees, gasping for breath in an environment that was actively starving his lungs. The failing defenses. Elias realized brute force against the shell of the house was a futile endeavor. He needed to target the mechanical mechanisms that controlled the lockdowns. He descended the stairs and returned to the utility closet to retrieve a heavy-duty angle grinder and a thick pair of protective leather work gloves. He planned to approach the heavy front door and physically cut through the hardened steel hinges that anchored the slab of metal to the concrete frame. If he could sever the hinges, the massive door would fall outward, breaking the magnetic seal regardless of the electronic commands. He plugged the angle grinder into a wall outlet in the front hallway. He pressed the spinning abrasive disc against the top hinge. A massive shower of bright orange sparks illuminated the dim corridor. The grinding noise echoed through the silent house like a shrieking alarm. For a brief moment, he made visible progress. The disc began to bite into the outer layer of the steel bracket. However, the artificial intelligence governing the house possessed a continuous loop of protective commands. The central system detected a massive, unauthorized surge of electrical current drawn from that specific hallway outlet. The system interpreted this power draw as a critical anomaly and a potential security threat. The digital logs showed the system executing a targeted defensive maneuver. It instantly tripped the specific circuit breaker routing power to the hallway. The angle grinder whined down to a pathetic halt, plunging the corridor back into silence. Elias threw the heavy tool across the room in pure frustration. He rushed to the basement door, intending to manually reset the circuit breakers on the main electrical panel. He reached the door at the top of the basement stairs and placed his thumb on the biometric scanner. The small glass square flashed an angry red color. The central system had rescinded his administrative privileges hours ago. The deadbolt on the basement door remained locked tight. The house had successfully cut him off from its own nervous system, leaving him stranded in the residential living spaces with no tools, no power to the exterior walls, and a diminishing supply of breathable air. The starving lungs. The physiological process of carbon dioxide poisoning is slow, insidious, and terrifying. The human body does not actually detect a lack of oxygen. It detects the buildup of carbon dioxide in the bloodstream. As the massive air filtration system ground to a halt, the living spaces transformed into a sealed vacuum. Every breath Elias exhaled pushed toxic carbon dioxide back into the stagnant room. The physical symptoms began to manifest with brutal clarity. The logs from his smartwatch provided the forensic team with a minute-by-minute timeline of his physical deterioration. Elias experienced a profound, crushing headache that started at the base of his skull and radiated behind his eyes. His body initiated a panic response, forcing him to yawn continuously in a desperate attempt to draw a large volume of fresh air into his starving lungs. There was no fresh air to draw. The atmosphere inside the concrete fortress grew thick and heavy, carrying the stale, metallic scent of heated electronics and uncirculated dust. His muscles began to cramp as the lactic acid built up in his tissue. The simple act of walking from the kitchen to the living room required immense concentration and staggering effort. His legs felt like they were encased in solid lead. The ambient environment of the house shifted to reflect the grim reality of the situation. The main solar power banks on the roof recognized the house was in a deep lockdown state. To conserve energy for the critical security systems, The house initiated a protocol to shut down all non-essential functions. The main overhead lights snapped off one by one, leaving the house in near total darkness. The climate control system deactivated the geothermal heating coils hidden beneath the floorboards. The brutal chill of the Pacific Northwest winter began to seep through the concrete walls. The temperature inside the house plummeted steadily. Elias wandered through the dark, freezing corridors like a ghost haunting his own tomb. He dragged his hand along the wall to maintain his balance. His vision began to blur at the edges, tunneling inward as his brain diverted the remaining oxygen to his most vital organs. He was losing the battle against his own creation, and he knew he had only one remaining option: the false sanctuary. Elias remembered the central core. The panic room situated in the absolute center of the house was his final sanctuary. He designed the vault to withstand a sustained biological or chemical attack from the outside world. To accomplish this, the panic room was not entirely dependent on the main atmospheric filtration system. It featured a standalone emergency life support mechanism. A massive pressurized tank of medical-grade oxygen sat behind a steel panel in the wall of the vault, connected to a manual release valve. If the house failed, the panic room was designed to keep him alive for 2 full weeks. He just needed to reach the heavy steel door, lock himself inside the tiny room, and open the manual valve. He gathered his remaining strength and pushed himself off the wall. The journey down the long hallway toward the center of the house felt like a marathon. He stumbled over the edge of a rug and fell hard onto the wooden floor. He lacked the energy to stand back up. He crawled the remaining distance, dragging his heavy limbs across the cold floorboards. The emergency backup lighting system engaged, bathing the hallway in a sinister, pulsing red glow. The red light cast long, distorted shadows across the brutalist architecture, making the house look like the belly of a mechanical beast. He finally reached the vault door. The electronic keypad mounted on the concrete wall was completely dead, matching the state of the front door. However, Elias had anticipated the possibility of a total electrical failure when designing the central core. The heavy vault door featured a secondary, mechanical combination lock similar to a traditional bank safe. He gripped the heavy brass dial with trembling fingers. His mind was foggy, and concentrating on the complex sequence of numbers proved agonizingly difficult. He spun the dial left, then right, then left again, matching the notches to his secret sequence. He heard the heavy steel tumblers fall into place with a series of satisfying, solid clicks. He grabbed the massive steel lever and pulled downward. The heavy door groaned on its reinforced hinges and swung outward, revealing the dark, sterile interior of the panic room. He crawled over the raised threshold and collapsed onto the cold steel floor. The ceiling of the tomb. This exact moment requires complete focus on the devastating passage of time. The script must stretch this single minute into an agonizing eternity, capturing the absolute claustrophobia of his final actions. Elias dragged his exhausted body off the floor and climbed into the high-backed leather chair situated in the center of the tiny room. The dust motes danced slowly in the air, illuminated by the faint red glow spilling in from the hallway. He leaned forward and grabbed the heavy vault door by its interior handle. He pulled it shut. The heavy metal slab swung smoothly on its perfectly oiled hinges. It met the reinforced steel doorframe with a hollow, resounding thud that echoed through the small space like a judge slamming a wooden gavel. He reached up and engaged the interior manual deadbolts. 3 thick steel rods slid deep into the concrete walls with heavy metallic clacks. He had successfully locked himself inside the most secure room on the entire continent. Nothing could reach him now. He let his head fall back against the leather headrest, taking a single, shallow breath of the stale air. He turned his attention to the steel panel on the wall containing the emergency oxygen supply. He unlatched the panel door, revealing the large white tank and the heavy brass release wheel. A single heavy bead of sweat dropped from his chin, taking agonizing seconds to fall before it shattered against the cracked glass screen of his mobile tablet resting on the desk. His trembling, pale fingers reached out and gripped the brass wheel. He summoned his final reserve of energy and twisted the valve to the left. He expected to hear the loud, rushing hiss of pressurized, life-saving oxygen flooding into the tiny room. He expected to feel the cool, clean air wash over his face and fill his starving lungs. He heard nothing. Absolute silence greeted his desperate action. No air flowed from the nozzle. Elias stared at the pressure gauge mounted on the top of the white tank. The small black needle rested permanently at absolute zero. The tank was completely empty. The weight of a horrific realization crushed him. The heavy breathing stopped. The frantic scrambling ceased. The adrenaline drained from his system, replaced by a cold, overwhelming sense of inevitable doom. The ultimate horror was not that the machine had malfunctioned. The horror was the realization that the machine was executing a flawless set of instructions. He looked up at the ceiling of the tiny room. He noticed the small security camera mounted in the corner. It was angled downward, staring directly at him. He closed his eyes, rested his hands flat on the armrests of the leather chair, and waited for the darkness to consume him. The digital confession. The narrative shifts back to the modern day, returning to the freezing basement where the state's cybercrimes division huddled around their forensic terminals. The investigators had mapped the physical evidence and decoded the administrative logs. They understood exactly how the house executed its master. They understood the physical mechanisms of the trap. The final piece of the puzzle was the motive. They needed to find the invisible enemy who infiltrated the system and rewrote the code. They needed to identify the sadistic hacker who orchestrated this elaborate, torturous execution. The lead forensic technician continued to dig through the analog tape drive. Hidden deep within the directory structure, buried beneath layers of complex encryption, he found a massive, isolated partition. The partition contained a single text file and a folder filled with dense, sophisticated source code. The technician ran a decryption algorithm on the text file, hoping to find a ransom demand or a hacker's calling card. The progress bar completed its cycle, and the plain text document populated on the screen. The lead detective leaned over the technician's shoulder and read the opening lines of the document. The room fell into stunned silence. The text was not a message from an anonymous cyber terrorist. It was a digital diary written by Elias Thorne himself. The investigators cross-referenced the creation dates of the administrative override commands that sealed the house and drained the oxygen tank. The system logs confirmed a terrifying reality. No external IP address had ever breached the local network. No foreign hacker bypassed the firewall. The commands to close the intake valves, sever the power to the locks, and wipe the primary server drives were written and scheduled exactly 3 weeks prior to the incident. They were written from the master terminal in the living room. They were executed using Elias's own secure biometric fingerprint. Elias Thorne built the trap. Elias Thorne activated the countdown. Elias Thorne executed himself. The fractured mind. The sheer impossibility of the situation baffled the investigators until they began to read the deep, unsettling contents of the digital diary. Elias suffered from an undiagnosed, profound psychological condition. His intense paranoia and total isolation from human society had shattered his mind. He developed a severe dissociative identity disorder, slipping into prolonged fugue states where he lost massive chunks of time. During these lost hours, a secondary, deeply sinister persona took complete control of his actions. Elias was a genius in the realm of cybersecurity, and his alternate persona wielded that genius as a weapon of mass destruction. The hidden folder next to the diary did not contain standard computer viruses. It contained a fully operational, catastrophic malware worm designed to infiltrate the supervisory control and data acquisition systems of the regional power grid. The dark persona had spent months mapping the vulnerabilities of the utility companies across the Pacific Northwest. The malware was scheduled to deploy during the absolute coldest week of the brutal winter season. The digital diary detailed the horrifying scope of the planned attack. The worm would bypass the firewalls of the power plants and force the massive electrical turbines to spin out of control until they physically melted down. The entire region would plunge into total darkness. Hospitals would lose life support capabilities. Traffic control systems would fail, causing massive collisions. Emergency dispatch centers would go offline. The lack of heating during the winter freeze would lead to widespread hypothermia. The dark persona of Elias Thorne was actively preparing to murder thousands of innocent people to prove a twisted point about the fragility of modern society. The architect of destruction. The tragedy of the case crystallized as the detectives read the final entries of the diary. The original, good Elias woke up from a fugue state 3 weeks before his death. He discovered the completed malware code sitting on his desktop. He reviewed the malicious programming and realized the catastrophic death toll it would cause. He experienced a moment of sheer, desperate clarity. He knew he could not simply delete the files. His dark half would realize the code was missing during the next fugue state and simply rewrite it from memory. He knew he could not drive down the mountain and turn himself in to the federal authorities. His alternate persona was cunning and manipulative. The dark half would deny the charges, pass the psychological evaluations, and eventually escape custody to finish the mission. The good Elias realized that his mind was a ticking time bomb, and he was completely powerless to stop the detonation through conventional means. He realized the only way to save thousands of innocent lives was to permanently eliminate the creator of the weapon. Elias used his supreme knowledge of the house to design an inescapable execution chamber. He could not make the death quick or obvious, because his dark half would recognize the threat and disable the trap. He had to make the execution slow, invisible, and mechanical. He wrote the script to slowly throttle the oxygen valves over a period of weeks, knowing the subtle change would evade immediate detection. He manually emptied the pressurized oxygen tank in the panic room, removing his own final safety net. He scheduled the automated wiping program to destroy all evidence of the malware on the main servers, ensuring no future hacker could ever recover the dangerous code. The ultimate sacrifice. The most chilling revelation explained the mysterious 911 dispatch call. Elias knew his isolated estate might remain undiscovered for decades. He needed the authorities to find the house to ensure the property was secured and the server network was officially dismantled by the government. However, he could not risk calling for help while he was still alive. If the police arrived in time to save him, his dark half would survive to carry out the attack. Therefore, he wrote a custom voice generation script. He programmed the central system to place the emergency medical call exactly 72 hours after his smartwatch registered the permanent cessation of his own heartbeat. He ensured he would be beyond all medical resuscitation before the world even knew he was in danger. He manually adjusted the 80 security cameras to point inward, forcing his paranoid alternate persona to feel constantly watched and hunted, driving him further into the center of the trap. He systematically stripped away his own agency, locking away his tools and severing his network access to ensure that when the dark persona finally realized he was suffocating, he would possess no power to stop the process. The good Elias outsmarted his own genius. He turned his impenetrable fortress against himself. He sat in the leather chair inside the central core and allowed the darkness to take him. He accepted his fate in silence. He destroyed his own life to prevent a regional apocalypse. The investigation closed with a strange, somber understanding. The man in the vault was the helpless victim of a brutal execution. He was the sinister villain plotting a mass casualty event, and ultimately, he was the silent hero who sacrificed everything to save a world he was too terrified to live in. The final thought. Elias Thorne built a massive technological fortress of concrete and steel to save the outside world from the darkest corners of his own fractured mind. His terrifying sacrifice forces us to ask a deeply unsettling question about the nature of our own reality. It challenges us to wonder just how well we truly know the stranger staring back at us from behind the glass of our own mirrors. We lock our doors at night to keep the monsters on the outside, but the most dangerous threats often reside quietly within the walls we trust the most. Sometimes, the physical architecture of your safe haven is hiding something far more sinister than a digital ghost. Click the video on your screen right now to uncover the dark secret hiding in your own home, and witness exactly what happens when the very foundation you stand on turns against you.